There is something happening in the invisible space between where they are and where you are. Something that has been building with the slow, inexorable pressure of water rising behind a structure that was never designed to hold it indefinitely. You may have felt it already, that particular quality of stillness that precedes significant movement, the atmospheric shift that arrives before the storm breaks, the sense that something in the dynamic between you has crossed a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. You are not misreading the signals. You are not constructing meaning from nothing. What you are sensing is real, and it has a specific shape and a specific timeline, and the next 48 hours will make visible what has been invisible for far too long. Jordan Peterson has said that the most significant things in life arrive not when we are ready for them, but when we have finally exhausted every alternative to facing them. And this person has exhausted their alternatives. Every strategy they deployed to avoid the full weight of what they lost, the busyness, the distraction, the forward momentum that was designed to carry them past the gravity of your absence, has run out of road. The road ends here, and what stands at the end of it is the unmanaged, unmediated, completely honest truth of what they gave up when they gave up you, sitting in front of them with the patience of something that has been waiting a long time and is no longer willing to wait. They did not expect it to feel like this. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about where they are right now, in the private hours when the performance they maintain for the rest of the world is finally allowed to rest. They expected that time would do what time is supposed to do, that the acute pain of loss would dull into something manageable, that the specific weight of your absence would gradually become background rather than foreground, that the life they returned to after you would eventually feel like enough. Time has not done those things. Time has done the opposite. The clarity has increased rather than diminished. The weight has grown rather than lightened. And the understanding of what they lost has deepened with every passing week in a way that has finally become impossible to sit with without doing something about it. Right. I feel this energy shifting in the comments if you have sensed something changing in the atmosphere between you. Let us be precise about what is happening inside them, because precision matters here in a way that the vague language of spiritual inevitability does not adequately honor. This is not the sentimental nostalgia of someone who occasionally misses what was comfortable and familiar. This is not the ego's resistance to the idea that something it once possessed has moved beyond its reach. This is not loneliness masquerading as love or boredom performing as regret. What is happening inside this person is something Peterson would recognize as the specific and irreversible experience of a man or woman confronting the genuine cost of a genuine mistake. Not the abstract awareness that something went wrong, but the visceral, daily, accumulating understanding of exactly what that something was and exactly what its absence means for the shape of their life going forward. They are replaying things. This is the mind's way of trying to extract understanding it did not have access to when it was living inside the experience. Returning to the footage of what existed between you with the particular vividness that only regret produces, noticing now what it failed to notice then, understanding in retrospect what was present in those ordinary moments that it did not have the wisdom to receive fully in real time. The conversation where you were honest with them about something that mattered to you, and they half listened, already partially retreated into the defended interior space where genuine reception was not happening. The evening where the quality of what existed between you was so clear and so good that it should have been undeniable, and they felt it. They absolutely felt it, and still managed to return the next morning to the performance of ambivalence that was destroying what they claimed to value. The specific moment, and there is always a specific moment, the one that the regret returns to most frequently, the one that has become the axis around which the rest of the reckoning revolves, when they could have chosen differently, could have said the true thing instead of the safe thing, could have stayed when they left and did not. Peterson wrote that the successful person is not the one who makes no mistakes, but the one who is willing to face the mistakes they have made with complete honesty and to allow that honesty to reorganize their understanding of themselves and their choices. That reorganization is happening in this person right now, and it is not comfortable. It is not the clean, resolved experience of someone who has processed their regret and arrived at peace with it. It is the active, present tense, ongoing experience of someone in the middle of a reckoning that has not yet found its resolution, someone who understands what they did and cannot yet see clearly how to address it, who feels the weight of the debt without yet knowing how to begin repaying it. There is a specific quality to the regret this person is carrying that distinguishes it from ordinary loss. Ordinary loss is the grief of something that ended, the sadness of a good thing that ran its course, the mourning of a connection that was real, but that circumstances or incompatibility or the natural movement of two people in different directions brought to its conclusion. That kind of loss, while genuinely painful, carries within it a kind of clarity. It ended because it ended. The ending makes sense, even if it hurts. What this person is carrying is different because the ending does not make sense to them anymore. It made sense at the time, or they told themselves it did. Constructed a narrative in which their departure or their distance or their withdrawal was reasonable, was necessary, was the product of genuine incompatibility or genuine incapacity rather than fear wearing the clothing of reason. But that narrative has not held. The evidence against it has accumulated with the quiet relentlessness of water finding its way through stone, and what remains now that the narrative has crumbled is the bare and uncomfortable truth that what ended between you did not end because it should have ended. It ended because they were not yet brave enough to sustain it. Peterson is ruthlessly clear on this point, that most of the suffering we bring into our own lives and into the lives of others is not the product of our genuine limitations, but of our refusal to be honest about what those limitations are and to do the work of expanding them. A genuine limitation is simply a boundary of current capability. It is not shameful, it is simply true, and acknowledging it opens the possibility of growth. But a refusal to acknowledge a limitation, a decision instead to dress that limitation in the language of preference or practicality or timing, is a different thing entirely. It is a choice. And the person who made that choice is now living inside its consequences with a clarity about who made it and why that they can no longer avoid. The 48 hours ahead are significant, not in the way of arbitrary spiritual timelines that exist to create suspense and keep you watching, but in the genuine sense of a person who has reached an internal threshold, where the pressure of what has been building has finally exceeded the resistance of what has been holding it back, where the cost of continued inaction has clearly and finally surpassed the cost of action, where the decision that has been forming in the private hours has solidified into something that can no longer be postponed without a kind of internal dishonesty they are no longer willing to maintain. Something is going to happen. Something that has been rehearsed internally for longer than they would easily admit, worked out and reworked, considered from every angle, tested against their fear of your response and found to be necessary regardless of what that response might be. They are going to reach out, not in the tentative, deniable way of someone who wants to test the temperature of your attention without risking anything real, not the casual-like, not the indirect signal, not the mutual friend deployed as a scout to determine whether the territory is safe before committing to the crossing. What is coming is direct. What is coming is honest. What is coming is the reaching out of a person who has finally accepted that the risk of your rejection is genuinely less terrible than the certainty of a life in which they never tried. Peterson says that you should not do what you hate. And they have been doing what they hate, living inside the cowardice of not addressing what they know needs to be addressed, performing contentment with a situation that they know is the product of their own failure of courage. The self-respect that genuine honesty restores is worth more to them now than the self-protection that continued silence provides. And that shift, from valuing the protection of silence over the cost of honesty, is what has finally tipped them toward action. Let us talk about what the action will look like, because it will not look like the films have taught you to expect grand gestures to look. It will not be a dramatic appearance at your door in the rain, not a sweeping declaration engineered for maximum emotional impact, not the kind of perfect verbal performance that only exists in scripts written with the benefit of hindsight and unlimited revision time. Real honesty from a person who is genuinely afraid does not arrive perfectly formed. It arrives uncertain. It arrives imperfect. It arrives carrying all the awkwardness of someone who is speaking the truth in real time rather than performing a version of the truth that has been polished until the rough edges that made it real have been smoothed away. What will arrive is a message, or a call, or a request to speak, that has a weight to it you will recognize immediately. Not the weight of strategy or calculation, not the measured quality of someone deploying words as instruments designed to produce a specific effect in you, but the weight of something that has been carried for a long time and is finally being set down. The weight of words that were not easy to write or speak, that required the overcoming of a resistance that was real and significant, that arrived here only because the person sending them finally understood that not sending them was no longer an option they could choose and still respect themselves. The message will be specific in a way that matters. Specificity is the signature of genuine regret as opposed to the performance of it. The person who is performing regret says, "I am sorry for how things ended. I am sorry if I hurt you." The vague, self-protective language of someone who wants the emotional credit of apology without the full cost of accountability. The person who has genuinely reckoned with what they did is specific. They name the moments, they name the choices. They say, "I know that when I did this specific thing, it produced this specific experience for you, and I understand that now in a way I did not understand it then, and I am not asking you to accept the understanding as though it undoes the harm, but I need you to know that the understanding is real." That specificity is what you will feel in what arrives in the next 48 hours. The difference between being seen by someone who has actually looked and being performed at by someone who has learned the vocabulary of looking. You will know the difference. You have learned, through everything that passed between you, exactly what that difference feels like. Write "I know the difference" in the comments if you have felt the gap between being truly seen and being strategically addressed. Peterson speaks at length about the necessity of what he calls cleaning your room, the obligation to address the disorder in your own life and your own sphere of responsibility before presuming to address the disorder in the world beyond it. And this person has been cleaning their room in the months since you. Not perfectly, not with the efficiency of someone who knew from the beginning what needed to be done and moved toward it directly, but with the genuine, halting, frequently uncomfortable process of a person who has started to take seriously the question of what they actually are and what they actually owe to the people they affect with their choices. The cleaning that is most relevant to what is coming in the next 48 hours is the internal cleaning, the confrontation with the specific patterns of thinking and behavior that produced the failure in your connection, the story they told themselves about why vulnerability was dangerous, the history that taught them to treat genuine intimacy as a threat to be managed rather than a gift to be received, the specific wound, and there is always a specific wound, always an original place where the learning happened that love was unsafe or that showing need was an invitation for exploitation, that they have been carrying without acknowledging its influence on how they behave with people who matter to them. They have been sitting with that wound in the period since you. Not comfortable sitting, not the peaceful contemplation of someone who has made peace with their history and integrated it gracefully into their sense of self, but the uncomfortable, resistant, frequently painful sitting of someone who has finally stopped being able to outrun the understanding that the wound is there and that it has been making their choices for them from beneath the level of their awareness. Peterson calls this the process of making the unconscious conscious, taking responsibility for the drives and patterns and fears that operate without your explicit endorsement and therefore cannot be altered without first being seen. They are seeing them now. The seeing is recent and incomplete and still in process, but the direction is clear and the momentum is genuine. And what is coming in the next 48 hours is the first externally visible expression of that internal work, the reaching out that is only possible because they have finally understood enough about why they pulled away to be able to approach again without simply repeating the same pattern in a new form. There are things they are going to say that they have never said to anyone, not because the things are particularly dramatic or unusual in themselves, but because saying them requires a kind of self-disclosure that this person has spent years protecting themselves against, the admission that they were afraid. Not the casual, socially acceptable admission of nervousness that costs nothing, but the deeper admission that the fear was the actual driver of choices they presented as something else. That what they called caution was avoidance, what they called needing space was flight, what they called being realistic was the refusal to be fully present with something that required more of them than they were prepared to give. The admission that you were right, about what was happening between you, about what you needed and were not receiving, about the imbalance that their unavailability created and that you named, perhaps more than once, in ways they deflected rather than received, because receiving them would have required acknowledging the validity of what you were saying, and that acknowledgement felt like too great a concession to make without losing something they were using to protect themselves. The admission that they missed you in a way they did not have language for at the time, and that the absence of language did not make the missing less real, but only less speakable, which is its own particular kind of loneliness. To feel something that you cannot say and to watch the opportunity to say it recede with every day that passes in silence. They found the language. It took longer than it should have, but it is there now, assembled and real, and it is coming to you in the next 48 hours, carried by someone who understands finally that saying it is more important than the outcome saying it might produce. Peterson says that to speak truthfully is to bring order out of chaos, that honesty has a creative function in the world, that naming what is real restructures reality around the truth rather than around the convenient fiction. What they are going to speak to you in the next 48 hours is the truth that has been living as chaos inside them for the entire duration of your separation, and the speaking of it will restructure something, whether it reconstructs what existed between you or whether it simply releases both of you from the particular limbo of unfinished business that unspoken truth creates. The next 48 hours will also reveal something about who they have become through this period, not just what they feel, but how they carry what they feel, whether the reckoning they have been doing has produced genuine change in the actual texture of how they show up, or whether it has produced only a more sophisticated understanding of patterns that remain fundamentally unchanged. Peterson is unsparing on this distinction because it matters more than anything else in the question of what is actually possible between two people after rupture. Understanding why you behaved as you did is necessary but not sufficient. The sufficient condition is behavior that is actually different, choices made differently in the real. Conditions of an actual relationship where fear and uncertainty and the temptation to retreat are present as constantly as they were before, and where the difference is in what the person does with those pressures rather than in the absence of the pressures themselves. The reaching out in the next 48 hours is itself an act of changed behavior. The person who left or withdrew or was unavailable in the ways that cost you both something is not a person who reaches out with honesty and accountability. The reaching out is evidence, not proof evidence, that something has genuinely shifted, that the calculus has changed in a way that is producing different choices, that the self who protected himself or herself at your expense has made sufficient contact with the consequences of that protection to be motivated towards something different. Whether that shift is durable, whether it will hold across the ordinary days that follow the extraordinary moment of this reaching out, across the weeks and months when the emotional intensity of the gesture has faded, and what remains is just the daily choice to show up fully rather than partially, to stay rather than retreat, to receive rather than manage. That cannot be determined from the gesture alone. It can only be determined over time, and you are not obligated to make a determination before time has had the opportunity to provide the evidence that determination requires. You are also not obligated to make the receiving of this easy for them. This is something the romantic framing of reunion always glosses over in its pull toward resolution, that the person who caused harm does not get to set the terms of its repair. That accountability is not discharged by the act of acknowledging it, and that genuine repair happens at the pace of the person who was harmed rather than at the pace of the person who is sorry. Your healing has its own timeline and its own requirements, and neither of those things are subordinate to their readiness to address what they did. You are allowed to receive what they bring with warmth and with the closed door, to hear them fully, to honor the genuine courage that reaching out requires, to acknowledge that the reckoning they have been through is real, and to say that this is not enough yet, that you need more than honesty about the past, that what would make a difference is evidence of change in the present and future accumulated over time rather than delivered in a single conversation, however honest it may be. That is not cruelty. That is the responsible management of your own heart, the application of the understanding you have earned through everything you absorbed in their absence. You are allowed to receive it with the open door. To decide that what they are bringing is enough to warrant the risk of beginning again, slowly and carefully, with the full knowledge of what you are risking and the full honesty about what you will and will not accept this time around. To meet their courage with your own courage, their honesty with your honesty, their willingness to try with your willingness to try, provided that trying means something specific and demonstrable, and not simply a return to the same dynamic wearing a new emotional vocabulary. You are allowed to receive it and need time to sit with what they bring without being required to respond from your immediate emotional reaction, which is never the full truth of where you are, which always contains proportions of hope and fear and longing and protection that need time to sort themselves into something that can be trusted as a genuine reflection of what you actually want and what you are actually available for. Time is not withdrawal. Time is respect for the complexity of what is being decided. But here is what Peterson would want you to hold on to through all of this, through the next 48 hours and whatever follows them. The understanding that you are not the passive recipient of this story, you are its co-author. What happens next is not something that happens to you based on what they decide to do and what they are capable of offering. It is something that you participate in creating through the choices you make about what to receive and what to require and what to build on and what to decline. The version of you that exists now, on the other side of everything you have absorbed and processed and grown through in the period of their absence, is not the same version that was present at the beginning of this story. You have learned things about yourself, about what you need, about the difference between love that expands you and love that requires you to be smaller in order to be acceptable, about the specific ways that genuine presence feels different from performed presence, about your own capacity to survive the thing you thought you could not survive and to find, on the other side of surviving it, that you are more than you knew you were. That knowledge is yours. It is not contingent on their reckoning or their return or what they do or do not do in the next 48 hours. It exists independently of them and will continue to exist regardless of what happens between you. And it is the most reliable guide you have for navigating whatever is coming. Peterson says that the way forward is always through the truth rather than around it, through the fear rather than in retreat from it, through the full complexity of what is real rather than into the comfortable simplification of what is manageable. The next 48 hours are going to ask you to go through something, through the emotion of receiving what they bring, through the complexity of deciding what it means and what you want to do with it, through the uncertainty of not knowing yet whether what they are offering is the thing it appears to be, or whether time and evidence will reveal something different. You have been through harder things. You know how to be inside uncertainty without being destroyed by it. You know how to feel the full weight of something and still think clearly enough to choose wisely. You know the difference between what fear wants you to do and what courage requires. Trust that knowing. It has been built through everything you have lived through, and it is more reliable than anything they can offer or withhold. The 48 hours are beginning. The energy that has been building toward this moment has crossed the threshold that makes action inevitable. What arrives will be real. It will carry the weight of genuine reckoning and genuine fear and genuine reaching towards something that was lost and that this person now understands was worth more than what they traded it for. Receive it from the full height of who you have become, not from the place of the person who was hurt, though that person's pain is real and valid and deserves its full acknowledgement. Not from the place of the person who hoped, though that hope is real too and not something to be ashamed of, but from the place of the person who did the work, who took what happened seriously enough to learn from it, who took herself seriously enough to heal rather than simply survive, who arrives at this moment knowing exactly what she is worth and exactly what she will and will not accept in service of that worth. That person is ready for whatever the next 48 hours bring, ready to receive honestly, to respond honestly, to choose from a place of genuine self-knowledge rather than from fear or longing or the romantic pull of a story that wants to resolve itself in a particular direction, regardless of whether that direction is true. Peterson's final word on the question of how to live is always the same. Tell the truth, or at least do not lie. Whatever you say to them, whatever you decide, let it be true. Let it be the real answer rather than the answer that is easiest or most comfortable or most likely to avoid further pain. The real answer is the only one that builds anything worth having. The next 48 hours will ask you for that truth. You already know what it is. You have known for longer than you have perhaps been willing to admit, and the courage to live by it, to speak it clearly and to let it shape what comes next regardless of how uncertain that next is. That, as Peterson would say, is where everything that matters actually begins.